Assalamualaikum. My name is Aslam and I will discuss the part Tristan and Isolde. Now, this part is taken from an opera composed by Richard Wagner between the years 1857 to 1859. The opera was based on Arthurian legend of the same name Tristan and Isolde. The opera is divided into three parts or acts, but I will give the short summary of them. Tristan is a knight of Cornwall who went on a mission to bring Isolde, a maiden in Ireland, to be his uncle, King Mark's wife. And now Isolde hated being forced to leave her home. She wished the ship would wreck. The sailor's song, that is line 31 to 34 in The Wasteland. Fresh blows the wind to the homeland, my Irish child, what are you waiting? Where are you waiting? Now, these lines are a foreshadowing of how the fate of Tristan and Isolde would end. Tristan, who, while on his way to Ireland to collect taxes, he slayed Isolde's fiancée. He was injured and treated by Isolde, whom at that time was unaware that the person whom she had nursed was her fiancé's murderer. It was only later on that ship that Isolde was told of this tragedy. Now, bitter and angry, she intended to poison them both. The two drank to reconciliation. The drink was thought to be poison, but instead it was switched to a love potion. Now, when the King Mark found out about this affair, Tristan, who was utterly in love with Isolde, had not a word to say. He asked Isolde to die with him so they could be together, and she agreed. Eliot, who's another knight in the opera, happened to be the one who notified the king of their affair and immediately drawn out of his war in wooing Tristan. Now, Tristan fled to his castle where his wound was treated. However, only Isolde's magical arts could heal him, but she took too long to arrive. By the time she arrived in the place that Tristan was Tristan's castle, Tristan passed away. Now King Mark came along and said that he will pardon the lovers, but the grief was so overwhelming for Isolde that she threw herself in the water and drowned herself, hoping that would unite them once more. Now, in my opinion, in this part, Eliot is emphasizing that death is the ultimate salvation. Their story begins with death and it ends with death. And their encounter was, although it was due to fate, but their love was due to the magic potion. Now, this seems like he's trying to point out that love is an illusion, and as long as we live in an illusion, it shall always be, right? So in connection with the lost generation, we can see that how they felt that their emotions or the feeling of love and happiness, it was an illusion, it will end someday, and they didn't know what emotion or what situation to trust in. And another thing that connects this story to the wasteland, or the theme of the wasteland, is death. Now, the major theme of wasteland is death, our cycle of life, which is birth and death. Now, in this story, death, the moral is that the death is eternity. It's an inseparable bond that all men must have. That's it.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Fatima Zoeb and I'm in Group B, and the story that was given to me is Tristan and Isolde. Now, the story is not actually a story, instead it's an opera written by Wagner, and the story starts with two kingdoms. There is a kingdom of Ireland and Cromwell, and the story starts when there is a person named Morholt is sent to Cromwell to demand tribute. Now, Morholt is actually the fiancé of Isolde, and from Cromwell's side, Tristan, who is actually the nephew of the king, is sent. Now, there happens to be a fight, and Tristan kills Isolde's fiancé, and what happens is that after he is returning, he gets injured, and he does not heal he cannot actually heal. So instead, he travels back to Ireland to Isolde, who is actually the princess, and she is known for her healing capacities. And during that era of like Princess Isolde's homeland, there is actually a dragon who is trashing the entire of her kingdom, and Tristan slays the dragon. And when she gets to know that this man is actually the man that has killed her fiance, she although feels a little bit resentment for him, but when she gets because of all the killing of dragons, she actually forgets him. Now, when Tristan goes back to his homeland, he praises the princess in a very highly terms, and the king actually decided to marry Isolde. Again, Tristan moves back to Ireland and to take the princess to Cromwell, and Isolde doesn't want that. But Isolde, she accepts and she gets on the ship with Tristan. And what happens is that Isolde's mother has actually prepared a love potion. Now, something happens, they both drink it, and they fell in love. Um, they try very hard to stay loyal there to where their loyalties lies, but somehow somewhere this king gets to know about it and tries really hard to trap them and gather information or evidences of them being involved. And he happens to do that, but he happens to do that, but Tristan has already fled Cromwell. And what happens is that Isolde does marry the king, and while Tristan is away from his homeland, he marries another Isolde. Both of the girls in the story are named Isolde. Um, and he marries another one. He gets injured again and yet cannot heal. So he sends a letter which says to the protagonist Isolde that I wish that you could heal me, and if you want to heal me, then send a ship that has a white sail, and if not, then send me a black sail. And when he is on his deathbed, he asks his wife Isolde that what is the message, and his wife Isolde, being very jealous, she says that it was a black sail, when instead Isolde was coming and she was late, and Tristan had already died, and in that grief Isolde also dies, and they both were buried in Cromwell. And the legend says that from Isolde's grave rose a rose tree, and from Tristan's grave rose a vine which intertwined itself in the rose tree, and whoever tried to cut the vine grew itself. Now the story ends here, and the story is related to the text, the first part of the text, because the all the German foreign language words, the first part in before Hyacinth's Girl is actually the first verse of the opera, which says, "Fresh wind blow home to my Irish child, where are you?" Now, like this is all greatly related to the story, and of course, there are references of the story in the whole part. And the last line of Hyacinth's Girl also reflects on that um, something like the sea is no more. And all of this is greatly related because if you compare to World War One, there was like this rows of navy, and people actually those who send their loved ones, of course, expected it that they return. Instead there were many losses in World War, and people did not always get what they wanted. People died in that World War, and that is what the agony of not returning and not expecting people to return is actually what is reflected through the story in that stanza. Another thing that greatly reflects from this whole story is that during this World War, people started to were loyal to whoever their monarchs were or their governments were, right? So they tried really hard to remain loyal to them, but instead, what they got in return was not reward or was instead like deaths, and even if fathers were taken to war, their sons would be taken to war. And this and comparing to this medieval story, it reflects greatly on how war actually affects the families and people of that time. And another thing that can be added to this discussion is that we talked about how art and how art destruction of art was a great trouble for Eliot. By taking this medieval story, and before it was an opera, it was actually a myth and it was created into an opera. Taking this in medieval story of and a very artistic story and putting it in a very depressing poem shows that the loss of art still in Eliot. He still was not over that, and he wanted to revive art again. And another thing that can be inculcated in this discussion is how, in the first lines where of this poem, where we talked about flowers rising from snow and snow, and how the rose tree rose from Isolde's grave, all shows like there is hope, and that even well, the legend says that even in their even if they were not together in their life, they would be together after they were dead. But we can take it in a way that there is always hope, and that after war there might be some kind of a kind of revival that this whole people needed, so that they can go back to their lives. And I think that is how the story um, revolves around this poem, and how this story reflects the poem. And this is it for my discussion. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Hamna Kaisar, roll number 17401. The reference I'll be discussing is The Tristan and Isolde by Richard Wagner. Okay, so Tristan and Isolde is an opera composed by Richard Wagner. It is based on the Arthurian love story of the same name, that is Tristan and Isolde. So talking about the summary, what basically happens is a young Tristan, he goes to Ireland to ask the hand of the princess Isolde for his uncle King Mark. King Mark was a king of Cornwall. He succeeded in his mission, and on the homeward journey, Tristan and Isolde they mistakenly drank the love potion prepared by Queen for her daughter and King Mark. So later as they secretly meet, they were betrayed to King Mark by Tristan's own friend, and Tristan is fatally wounded in a fight. So Tristan now wants to die only with Isolde, and ultimately he gets his last wish fulfilled, and because as Isolde also joins him in death. Now talking about the wasteland. In the wasteland, Eliot is emphasizing that death is an ultimate salvation. Tristan and Isolde begins with death, and it as well as ends with death. Wagner uses leitmotifs. Now what's leitmotifs? They are recurrent theme throughout a musical or literary composition associated with a particular person, a particular idea, or a particular situation. In Tristan and Isolde, there are a lot of leitmotifs. Similarly, Eliot uses the idea of leitmotifs in the wasteland. The different fragments and the repetitious themes in the wasteland are joined together like the different leitmotifs in Tristan and Isolde. So, in the second part of the burial of the dead, it uses natural imagery to represent death, specifically of a loved one. So, the allusion to the opera Tristan and Isolde is specifically effective as it is a passage about a sailor separated from his love. So, in the last line of the section, that is line number 42, Ode and Lear des Mers, which means that the sea is empty and desolate, describes the death of the sailor as they go out to the sea. So, this death causes the Hyacinth girl to feel after she hears that her beloved sailor as if her soul is dying too. which mirrors the death of the main character in Tristan and Isolde who die for their love. So this was all from my side.